The unmistakable sound of gunshots echoed through the valley as Julia Andrews pressed herself against the crumbling stone wall of the abandoned church, her trembling hands protectively cradling her swollen belly. Wickenburg, Arizona Territory, 1878, a place and time that had shown her little mercy, yet somehow had led her to this unlikely sanctuary where she would make her desperate stand. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the broken stained glass windows, painting the dusty wooden floor with fragments of colored light. Julia had been living in the ruins of St. Matthew's Church for nearly 3 weeks now, ever since the stage she'd been traveling on had been attacked by bandits outside of town. With nowhere else to go, 7 months pregnant and entirely alone, she'd found her way to this forgotten place on the outskirts of Wickenburg. "Easy now," she whispered to her unborn child as another volley of gunfire closer this time made her flinch. "Those aren't coming for us." The church had been abandoned for years, according to the townsfolk who occasionally brought her supplies. The roof over the sanctuary had partially collapsed, but the small room that had once been the minister's study remained intact. It was there that Julia had made her humble home, with a thin straw mattress on the floor and a few meager possessions salvaged from her journey. She peered through a crack in the wall, her breath catching at the sight of riders in the distance. Not bandits this time, but what appeared to be a posse chasing someone. Her heart pounded as she watched them disappear over the ridge toward town. Julia slumped back against the wall, exhaustion washing over her. At 22, she had never imagined she would end up here widowed, pregnant, and hiding in an abandoned church in the Arizona Territory. Thomas, her husband of barely a year, had died of typhoid fever 3 months into their journey west from Boston. She'd continued on, determined to reach her cousin in California before her baby arrived, but fate had other plans. A sound outside different from the receding gunfire made her freeze. Footsteps. Approaching the church, Julia grabbed the small knife she kept beside her mattress, the only protection she had. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the creak of the church's weathered front door. "Hello," a deep male voice called out. "Anyone in here? I saw smoke from your fire." Julia remained silent, knife clutched to her chest. "I mean no harm," the voice continued. "I'm just looking for a place to rest my horse. Been riding hard all day." After a moment's hesitation, Julia called back. "State your business, mister. I'm armed." A low chuckle followed. "Madam, if you're half as dangerous as you sound, I'd best be careful." The footsteps paused. "Name's Gabriel Easton. I'm the new deputy in Wickenburg. Sheriff Daniels mentioned someone might be staying out here." Julia's grip on the knife loosened slightly. Sheriff Daniels had been kind to her, bringing food once a week and checking on her welfare. "You can come in," she finally said, "but I've got nothing worth stealing." The footsteps resumed, and a moment later a tall figure appeared in the doorway to her small room. The man removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind, yet still youthful. He couldn't have been more than 28. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her condition. "Madam," he said with a respectful nod, his gaze moving from her pregnant belly to the knife in her hand and back to her face. "Sheriff didn't mention you were expecting." "Does that change something?" Julia asked warily. Gabriel shook his head. "Not at all. Just makes me wonder why a woman in your condition is living in a place like this." His eyes scanned the crumbling walls and leaking ceiling. "Not exactly suitable for bringing a child into the world." Julia stiffened. "I don't have many options, Deputy Easton." Gabriel's expression softened. "No, I suppose not." He glanced around the room again. "This old church has seen better days." "It's shelter," Julia replied simply. "More than I had on the road." Gabriel nodded, then unexpectedly set his hat on a broken pew and shrugged off his dusty coat. Mind if I take a look at that roof? Rain's coming tonight according to my knee, and that looks like it won't keep out much water. Julia stared at him in confusion. Why would you want to do that? Because, Gabriel said, rolling up his sleeves, a leaky roof is no place for a baby to be born, and I've got two good hands that aren't doing anything at the moment. Without waiting for a response, he moved to examine the damaged ceiling. Julia watched in bewilderment as this stranger, this deputy, began assessing the church's many needs as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You don't need to do this, she said finally. I'm just passing through. Once the baby comes and I'm strong enough to travel, I'll be moving on to California. Gabriel paused in his examination and looked at her. And when's the little one due? 6 weeks, give or take, Julia admitted. Then you'll be here through winter, Gabriel stated matter-of-factly. Nobody travels these parts in winter with a newborn, not if they want to live. He pulled a piece of rotted wood from the ceiling and tossed it aside. This place needs work, lots of it. Why do you care? Julia asked, unable to hide her suspicion. Men, in her experience, rarely offered help without expecting something in return. Gabriel stopped working and turned to face her fully. His expression was serious but gentle. My mother was in a situation not unlike yours once. Nobody helped her. He paused. I reckon if someone had, things might have turned out different. The simple honesty in his voice caught Julia by surprise. She lowered the knife completely. I'm Julia, she said finally. Julia Andrews. Gabriel smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Pleased to meet you properly, Miss Andrews. Mrs., she corrected automatically. Though my husband is no longer with us. Gabriel nodded respectfully. Mrs. Andrews, then. If you'll permit me, I'd like to come back tomorrow with some proper tools and materials. This church deserves better than to fall apart, and so do you. Julia wanted to protest, to maintain her independence, but the baby kicked forcefully as if in disagreement, and she placed a hand on her belly. The reality of her situation was impossible to deny. She needed help. Thank you, she said quietly. I would appreciate that. As the first drops of rain began to patter against the damaged roof, Gabriel moved quickly to position a bucket under the worst leak. For tonight, he said, but tomorrow we start making this place right again. Julia nodded, watching as this unexpected stranger continued to secure the room against the coming storm. For the first time since Thomas died, since the bandits attacked her stagecoach and left her stranded, she felt a small spark of hope ignite within her. Outside, the rain intensified, but inside the broken church, something new had begun. True to his word, Gabriel returned the next morning with a wagon loaded with lumber, tools, and supplies. Julia watched from the doorway of the church as he unhitched his horse and began unloading. You're really serious about this, she observed, stepping carefully down the worn stone steps to meet him. Gabriel looked up from his work, shielding his eyes from the morning sun. I'm a man of my word, Mrs. Andrews. He gestured to the wagon. Sheriff let me borrow the town wagon. Figured we'd start with the roof today. Julia approached the wagon, eyeing the supplies with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. This must have cost a fortune. I can't possibly repay you. Gabriel waved away her concern. Most of this was donated by folks in town. Wickenburg may be rough around the edges, but people look out for one another here. He paused, studying her face. Did you sleep at all? That rain was coming down something fierce. Julia managed a small smile. Between the leaks and the baby doing somersaults, not much. Gabriel nodded sympathetically. Well then, let's fix at least one of those problems. He handed her a paper-wrapped package. Mrs. Holloway at the general store sent this for you. Said every expectant mother needs proper nourishment. Julia unwrapped the package to find fresh bread, cheese, and dried fruit. The simple kindness brought unexpected tears to her eyes, which she quickly blinked away. "Please thank her for me," she said, composing herself. Gabriel noticed her emotion but tactfully focused on unloading the wagon. "You can thank her yourself when you're up to visiting town. Folks are curious about the lady living in the old church." Julia tensed visibly. "I'd rather not be the subject of town gossip." Gabriel paused in his work. "It's not gossip, Mrs. Andrews. It's concern. You might find Wickenburg more welcoming than you expect." Before Julia could respond, Gabriel had hauled a ladder from the wagon and positioned it against the church wall. "If you're feeling up to it, you might help by sorting these nails by size. I'll get started on the worst part of that roof." For the next several hours, Julia sat in the shade sorting nails while Gabriel worked on the roof, hammering, removing rotted wood and replacing it with new boards. The rhythmic sound of his work was oddly comforting, and Julia found herself relaxing despite herself. "How did you learn to do all this?" she called up to him during a brief pause in the hammering. Gabriel's face appeared at the edge of the roof. "Worked construction in Denver for a few years before taking up the badge. Built half the saloons on Cherry Creek." He grinned. "Though this is the first church I've worked on. Seems fitting somehow." "And how did you end up a deputy in Wickenburg?" Julia asked, genuinely curious. Gabriel disappeared from view, and the hammering resumed for a moment before he answered. "Came looking for a fresh start after my brother was killed in a mining accident. Sheriff Daniels took a chance on me despite my lack of law experience." There was a pause. "Said he'd rather have a man who built things than one who tore them down." Julia considered this as she continued sorting nails. "And do you like being a lawman?" The hammering stopped again. "Most days, it's honest work." Gabriel appeared at the edge of the roof again. "What about you, Mrs. Andrews? What brought you out west?" Julia hesitated, unsure how much to share. "My husband was a schoolteacher in Boston. He had dreams of starting a school in California where education would be available to all children, regardless of background." She rested her hand on her belly. "After he died, I decided to continue to California. His cousin runs a boarding house in Sacramento." "That's quite a journey to make alone," Gabriel observed, his tone respectful. "It wasn't supposed to be alone," Julia said quietly. "But life rarely follows our plans." Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. "No, it surely doesn't." He disappeared back onto the roof, and the hammering resumed. By midday, the worst leaks in the roof had been patched, and Gabriel climbed down the ladder, his shirt damp with sweat despite the cool autumn air. Julia had prepared a simple meal with the provisions he'd brought, and they ate in companionable silence on the church steps. "Why this church?" Gabriel asked suddenly. "There are abandoned buildings closer to town." Julia looked at the weathered structure behind them. It felt safe somehow. "Sacred, even though it's been abandoned." She shrugged. "And no one seemed to mind me being here. It's been empty for nearly 5 years, Gabriel explained. "The congregation built a new church in town after the flash flood damaged this one. No one had the heart to tear it down, but no one had the means to restore it either." He gazed thoughtfully at the building. "St. Matthew's, it was called." "Yes, I saw the inscription above the door," Julia said. "It's still beautiful despite everything." Gabriel nodded in agreement. "It just needs someone to care for it again." He looked at her curiously. "You're not planning to stay in Wickenburg permanently, though?" Julia shook her head. "As soon as the baby comes and we're strong enough to travel, we'll continue to California." Something like disappointment flickered across Gabriel's face, but he quickly masked it. "Well, until then this place should be made proper for you both." He stood up, brushing crumbs from his pants. "I should get back to work if I want to finish the main roof before sundown." As he climbed back up the ladder, Julia found herself watching him with growing curiosity. Deputy Gabriel Easton was unlike any man she had encountered on her journey west. There was an earnestness to him, a straightforward decency that seemed rare in these parts. For the remainder of the afternoon, Julia helped as much as her condition would allow, handing up materials when Gabriel called for them and clearing debris from inside the church. By the time the sun began to set, the roof over the main sanctuary had been patched, and Gabriel was working on reinforcing the door. "Tomorrow I'll fix the windows," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Nights are getting colder. You'll need proper protection from the elements." "Deputy Easton," Julia began, then hesitated. "Gabriel," he corrected. "If I'm going to be hammering away here every day, you might as well use my given name." "Gabriel," Julia conceded. "You don't have to do all this. Surely you have duties in town." Gabriel tested the newly reinforced door, ensuring it closed properly. "Sheriff's given me mornings to help out here, said it was a worthy cause." He glanced at her. "Unless you'd prefer I didn't come back." "No," Julia said quickly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I mean, I appreciate the help. I just don't want to be a burden." Gabriel's expression softened. "You're not a burden, Mrs. Andrews, not to me." As he prepared to leave for the evening, loading his tools back into the wagon, Julia found herself reluctant to see him go. The church, for all its newfound improvements, would feel empty without his presence. "Will you really come back tomorrow?" she asked as he climbed onto the wagon seat. Gabriel smiled, the fading sunlight catching in his eyes. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." As she watched him drive off toward town, Julia placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her palm. "Well, little one," she whispered, "it seems we've found a friend in this wilderness after all." The following days established a rhythm to Julia's previously solitary existence. Each morning, Gabriel would arrive with supplies, work on the church until midday, then return to his deputy duties in town. In the afternoons, Julia would continue sorting through the rubble inside, salvaging what could be saved and clearing what couldn't. On the fourth day, Gabriel arrived with 2 additional workers, young men from town, who needed extra money and were willing to help with the heavier tasks. Under Gabriel's direction, they repaired the collapsed section of roof over the altar area and reinforced the weakened walls. "The whole town's talking about what you're doing here," Julia commented as they shared lunch in what had once been the church's small garden, now overgrown with desert wildflowers and scrub brush. Gabriel shrugged, seemingly embarrassed by the observation. "People need something to talk about, I suppose. They're saying you're sweet on the mysterious pregnant lady in the old church," Julia continued, watching his reaction carefully. A flush crept up Gabriel's neck. "Well, folks always did have active imaginations in these parts." "And are they wrong?" Julia pressed, surprising herself with her boldness. Gabriel met her eyes directly. "Mrs. Andrews, Julia, I respect your situation too much to impose unwanted attention. My only aim is to help you and your child have a safe place until you're ready to move on." "And if it weren't unwanted?" The words escaped before Julia could reconsider them. Gabriel's expression shifted, vulnerability briefly replacing his usual confident demeanor. "Then I'd say Wickenburg has more to offer than you might have first thought." He cleared his throat. "But you're still mourning your husband and you have plans to leave. I wouldn't presume." Julia looked down at her hands, twisted in her lap. "Thomas was a good man. We had a content marriage, if not a passionate one." She spoke carefully, sorting through feelings she had barely acknowledged to herself. "His death grieved me deeply, but these past months on the road have changed me. I'm not the same woman who left Boston." Gabriel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The West has a way of stripping us down to who we really are." "Yes," Julia agreed, "and sometimes showing us who we might become." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Gabriel stood and offered her his hand to help her up. "Come see what the men have done with the altar space," he said. "I think you'll be pleased." As the days turned into weeks, the transformation of St. Matthew's Church continued at a remarkable pace. Word of the restoration project spread throughout Wickenburg, and soon volunteers began appearing, men with carpentry skills, women with cleaning supplies and curtains, children carrying wildflowers to plant in the garden. "I don't understand," Julia said to Gabriel one afternoon as they watched 3 women from town scrubbing years of dust from the recovered pews. "Why do they care so much about this place?" Gabriel leaned against a newly repaired wall. "People need something to believe in, something to work toward together. This church, it's a symbol of renewal for them." He glanced at her. "And for me." Julia felt her heart quicken at the look in his eyes. In the 2 weeks since Gabriel had begun restoring the church, something had shifted between them, a growing closeness that neither acknowledged directly but both felt keenly. "The baby's more active these days," she said, changing the subject to safer ground. "Especially when you're hammering." "I think he likes the rhythm." Gabriel smiled. You think it's a boy?" Julia nodded. "I do, strong and stubborn, just like his father was." A shadow passed over Gabriel's face at the mention of her late husband, but he quickly recovered. "Well, he'll need a proper place to sleep. I've been working on something for him." He held out his hand. "Come see." Julia followed him to the small room adjoining her living space, where Gabriel had been working in secret for the past few days. Inside, she found a beautifully crafted wooden cradle, sanded smooth and carved with delicate patterns. "Gabriel," she gasped, running her fingers over the polished wood. "This is exquisite." "My father taught me woodworking when I was a boy," Gabriel explained, a hint of shyness in his voice. "Haven't had much call to use those skills as a deputy, but—" He trailed off, watching her face anxiously. "Do you like it?" Tears welled in Julia's eyes. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received." Gabriel's expression brightened. "There's a drawer underneath for blankets. Mrs. Holloway and some of the ladies in town are making a set for you." Julia shook her head in amazement. "I don't know how I'll ever thank everyone. When I arrived here, I was alone and afraid. Now—" She gestured to the cradle, the repaired church, the signs of community all around them. "Now I feel like I've found a place where we might belong." "You have," Gabriel said softly. "If you want it." Their eyes met, and in that moment Julia recognized the depth of feeling that had grown between them. It frightened her, this unexpected attachment to a place she had never meant to stay, to a man she had never meant to meet. "I still plan to go to California," she said, though the words lacked conviction. "My cousin is expecting me." Gabriel nodded, disappointment evident despite his attempt to hide it. "Of course. I understand." That evening after Gabriel had left, Julia sat alone in the church, feeling the baby move within her as she contemplated her future. The original plan to reach California to live with Thomas's cousin, to raise her child in Sacramento, suddenly seemed less certain than before. Wickenburg was growing on her, as was the community that had embraced her so unexpectedly. And Gabriel. She closed her eyes, admitting to herself what she had been trying to deny. She was falling in love with the kind-hearted deputy who had transformed not just the abandoned church, but her sense of possibility as well. A sharp pain in her abdomen interrupted her thoughts, making her gasp. It passed quickly but left her unsettled. The baby wasn't due for another 3 weeks at least. "Not yet, little one," she whispered. "We're not quite ready for you yet." But as she prepared for sleep that night, Julia couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully laid plans were about to change once again. The next morning, Gabriel arrived with news that sent a ripple of excitement through Wickenburg. "The circuit preacher's coming through next week," he announced as he helped Julia clean the newly repaired stained glass windows. "Reverend Mitchell. Does weddings, baptisms, the works. Only comes through every few months." Julia paused in her work. "Is that why everyone's been so eager to finish the repairs? For the Reverend's visit?" Gabriel nodded. "Partly. There are 3 couples waiting to be married and a handful of babies needing christening. The town church is too small for everyone who'll want to attend. So they'll use St. Matthew's," Julia realized. "That's wonderful, Gabriel. Your work is bringing this place back to life." "Our work," he corrected gently. "You've been at the heart of it all, Julia." She smiled, touched by his inclusion. "I've done little more than watch and hand you nails." "You've done more than you know," Gabriel said, his voice low and serious. "You've given this town something to rally around, a purpose." Julia felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "You give me too much credit." Gabriel stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. "Julia, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart began to race at his tone. "Yes." But before he could continue, Sheriff Daniels appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Easton, need you in town. Bank robbery in progress." Gabriel's demeanor changed instantly, the tender moment broken as he transformed from gentle carpenter to determined lawman. "I'll be right there." He turned back to Julia, conflict evident in his eyes. "I have to go." "Go," she urged him. "Be careful." He squeezed her hand briefly. "I'll return as soon as I can. Stay here, stay safe." With that, he was gone, rushing after the sheriff toward whatever danger awaited in town. Julia stood in the church doorway, watching until he disappeared from sight, an inexplicable sense of dread settling over her. The hours that followed were the longest of Julia's life. She paced the church, jumping at every distant sound, praying for Gabriel's safe return. As dusk approached with no word from town, her worry deepened. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Julia wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and began the walk toward Wickenburg. She had made it halfway when she saw a rider approaching, not Gabriel, but a young boy from town she recognized as the blacksmith's son. "Mrs. Andrews." The boy called, reining his horse to a stop beside her. "You shouldn't be out here, madam. Deputy Easton sent me to check on you." "Is he all right?" Julia demanded. "What's happened in town?" The boy shifted uncomfortably. "There was shooting at the bank. The robbers got away, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Julia pressed, her heart in her throat. "Deputy Easton was hit. Doc Wilson's tending to him now. Said it ain't too serious, but he lost blood." Julia felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. "Take me to him," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." The boy looked uncertain. "Madam, in your condition, now," Julia repeated, already moving toward his horse. "Help me up." Reluctantly, the boy extended his arm, helping Julia mount behind him. The ride into town was uncomfortable and jarring, but Julia barely noticed, her thoughts consumed with fear for Gabriel. They arrived at Doc Wilson's office to find it crowded with townspeople seeking news about the deputy. Julia pushed her way through, ignoring the curious glances at her pregnant form until she reached the doctor himself. "Where is he?" she demanded. Doc Wilson, a grizzled man in his 60s, assessed her with shrewd eyes. "You must be the church lady. He's been asking for you." He nodded toward a back room. Bullet went clean through his shoulder. His lucky few inches lower would have hit his heart. Julia pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob of relief. "May I see him?" The doctor nodded. Just don't excite him. He needs rest." Julia entered the small room where Gabriel lay on a narrow bed, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale but his eyes alert. When he saw her, a mixture of relief and concern washed over his features. "Julia," he breathed, "you shouldn't have come into town." "It's not safe. Hush," she interrupted, moving to his bedside and taking his hand. "You're lecturing me about safety while lying there with a bullet hole in you." A weak smile touched his lips. "Occupational hazard. Did you catch them? The robbers?" Julia asked. Gabriel shook his head slightly. "Got away with about $200. Sheriff's organizing a posse to go after them at first light." His expression darkened. "I should be riding with them." "You most certainly should not," Julia scolded. "You need to heal." Gabriel's fingers tightened around hers. "I was going to ask you something important when the sheriff interrupted us." Julia's heart skipped. "It can wait until you're better." "No," Gabriel insisted. "I've waited too long already." He struggled to sit up straighter, wincing at the pain the movement caused. "Julia Andrews, I know you've only been in Wickenburg a short time, and I know you have plans to continue to California, but I'm asking you to consider staying." His eyes, intense despite his weakened state, held hers. "Stay here, with me?" Julia felt tears forming. "Gabriel, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking out of pity or some misplaced sense of duty. I'm asking because these past weeks working alongside you, getting to know you, have been the happiest of my life." He took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Julia, and if you'll give me the chance, I'll spend every day trying to make you and your child happy." Tears spilled down Julia's cheeks. "But we've known each other such a short time." "Some people search their whole lives and never find what I recognized in you within days," Gabriel replied. "I know my own heart, Julia. The question is, do you know yours?" Before Julia could answer, a sharp pain seized her abdomen, stronger than the one she had felt the previous night. She gasped, clutching at her belly. Gabriel's expression shifted to alarm. "Julia, what is it?" "The baby," she managed through gritted teeth. "Something's wrong. It's too early." Doc Wilson appeared at the doorway, summoned by her cry of pain. "How far apart are the contractions, Mrs. Andrews?" "I don't know," Julia said, panic rising in her voice. "This is only the second strong one, but I've been feeling twinges since yesterday." The doctor moved quickly to her side. "Let's get you lying down. Baby's coming whether it's time or not." Gabriel struggled to rise from his bed. "Julia, stay put, deputy," the doctor ordered firmly. "You'll tear those stitches. I'll take care of her." As another contraction gripped her, Julia reached for Gabriel's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Don't leave me," she pleaded. "Never," Gabriel promised, defying the doctor's orders to sit up more fully. "I'm right here with you." For the next several hours, Julia labored in the room adjacent to Gabriel's, the thin wall between them doing little to muffle her cries of pain. Gabriel, despite his own injury, refused to rest, insisting on sitting upright in his bed, calling encouragement to Julia through the wall, and praying fervently for her safety and that of the child. Shortly after midnight, a new cry filled the doctor's office, the unmistakable wail of a newborn taking its first breath. "It's a boy," Doc Wilson called through the wall. "Healthy as can be, despite being a few weeks early." Gabriel closed his eyes in profound relief, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Thank God," he whispered. A little while later, after Julia had been cleaned up and the baby swaddled, Doc Wilson helped her into a chair and wheeled her into Gabriel's room, the infant cradled in her arms. "Someone wants to meet you," Julia said softly, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. Gabriel gazed in wonder at the small bundle in her arms. "He's perfect, Julia." She smiled tiredly. "Would you like to hold him?" Carefully, Mindful of his injured shoulder, Gabriel accepted the newborn, cradling him awkwardly but tenderly. The baby's eyes, still unfocused, seemed to study the new face above him. "Hello there, young man," Gabriel whispered. "You've had quite the dramatic entrance into this world." Julia watched them together, her heart full to bursting. In that moment, seeing Gabriel hold her son with such gentle reverence, she knew her answer to his earlier question. "Yes," she said quietly. Gabriel looked up, confusion momentarily crossing his features. "Yes, I'll stay in Wickenburg," Julia clarified, her voice growing stronger. "Yes, I know my own heart. And yes, Gabriel Easton, I'm falling in love with you too." Joy transformed Gabriel's face. "Julia, are you certain? What about California?" "California can wait," she replied simply. "Our future is here." As if in agreement, the baby made a small, contented sound, curling his tiny fingers around Gabriel's much larger one. "He needs a name," Gabriel said, looking down at the infant with unmistakable affection. Julia considered for a moment. "Matthew," she decided. "After the church that brought us together." "Matthew," Gabriel repeated, testing the name. "It's perfect." He looked up at Julia, his eyes filled with emotion. "When Reverend Mitchell comes next week, he'll have one more ceremony to perform than he expected." Julia smiled, reaching out to touch both her son and the man who had so unexpectedly captured her heart. "I can't think of a more fitting place for a wedding than the church you restored with your own hands." "That we restored," Gabriel corrected. "Together." The news of Matthew's birth and of Gabriel and Julia's intended marriage spread through Wickenburg like wildfire. Within days, the town had rallied even more enthusiastically around the restoration of St. Matthew's Church, determined to have it fully ready for the multiple celebrations to come. Women arrived daily with gifts for the baby and Julia: blankets, clothes, a rocking chair for the church's small living quarters. Men worked alongside the still recovering Gabriel, who supervised from a chair with his arm in a sling, completing the repairs to the building that had become the heart of an unexpected love story. 5 days after Matthew's birth, Reverend Mitchell arrived in Wickenburg to find the entire town buzzing with excitement about the upcoming wedding. The circuit preacher, a kind-faced man in his 50s, visited Julia and Gabriel at the doctor's office where they were still recovering. "This is quite the story," he said after hearing their tale. "A pregnant widow finding refuge in an abandoned church, a deputy restoring it, and now a wedding and a newborn. God works in mysterious ways indeed. Will you marry us, Reverend?" Gabriel asked, his arm still in a sling but his color much improved. "The church isn't grand, but from what I hear, it's been restored with more love than many cathedrals can claim," Reverend Mitchell interrupted. "I would be honored to officiate your union there." 3 days later, on a crisp November morning, St. Matthew's Church stood resplendent in the desert sunlight. The broken windows had been repaired, the collapsed roof rebuilt, the weathered walls reinforced and freshly whitewashed. Wildflowers gathered from the surrounding hills adorned the altar and lined the aisle. Inside, the church was filled to capacity with the people of Wickenburg. In the front pew, Mrs. Holloway held baby Matthew, now 8 days old, and dressed in a christening gown that had been passed down through her family for generations. Gabriel stood at the altar, his deputy's uniform replaced by a new suit, his injured arm still in a sling but his face alight with joy as he watched Julia walk toward him. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Peterson, the dressmaker, had worked day and night to complete, with wildflowers woven into her dark hair. As Julia reached Gabriel's side, he took her hand in his good one, his eyes never leaving her face. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Mitchell began, We are gathered here today in this house of God, so lovingly restored, to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The ceremony was simple but profound. When the time came for vows, Gabriel spoke from his heart. Julia Andrews, you came into my life unexpectedly, like a prayer I didn't know I'd been saying. I promise to love you and Matthew as my own family, to build a life worthy of the trust you've placed in me, and to thank God every day for bringing you to this church and into my heart. Julia's eyes shimmered with tears as she responded. Gabriel Easton, when I sought shelter in these ruins, I was looking only for temporary refuge. Instead, I found a home, a community, and a love I never thought to experience again. I promise to stand by you through all of life's storms, to raise our family in faith and love, and to cherish every day of the life we'll build together. By the power vested in me, Reverend Mitchell proclaimed after they had exchanged rings. Gabriel's, a simple gold band purchased from the jeweler in Phoenix. Julia's, his mother's ring that he had kept safe all these years. I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. As Gabriel gently kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in cheers. Baby Matthew, startled by the noise, began to cry, and Julia laughed as she took her son into her arms. "Shh, little one," she soothed. "These are happy sounds." After the ceremony, the entire town gathered for a celebration in the churchyard. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every household, and a makeshift dance floor had been constructed where, despite his injury, Gabriel insisted on sharing one careful dance with his new wife. "Are you happy, Mrs. Easton?" he asked as they swayed gently, Matthew sleeping peacefully in a cradle nearby, guarded by a rotating shift of adoring townswomen. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Julia replied, resting her head against his good shoulder. "Though I confess, I'm anxious to spend our first night as a family in our church home." Gabriel smiled. "About that, I have a surprise for you." As the celebration continued around them, Gabriel led Julia to the far side of the church property, where a new structure stood, a small but sturdy cabin built adjacent to the church. "When did you do this?" Julia gasped, taking in the fresh-cut timber and solid construction. "I didn't," Gabriel admitted. "The town did while we were recovering at Doc Wilson's. Sheriff organized it as a wedding present." He opened the door, revealing a cozy interior with a fireplace, a handmade table and chairs, a large bed, and in the corner the cradle Gabriel had crafted for Matthew. "This is our home now. The church will continue as a place of worship for the town." Julia stepped inside, overwhelmed by the generosity of their neighbors. "It's perfect, Gabriel." He wrapped his good arm around her waist. "Not as grand as what you might have had in Boston or even in California. It's everything I could want," Julia interrupted, "because it's ours." That night, after the festivities had ended and they had settled Matthew in his cradle, Gabriel and Julia stood in the doorway of their new home, looking out at the church that had brought them together. "What do you think the future holds for us?" Julia asked, nestled against her husband's side. Gabriel gazed down at her, love evident in every feature. "Many more children, I hope. A lifetime of building and growing together." He kissed her forehead. "And every year, on our anniversary, we'll stand in that church and remember how it all began." "With a pregnant woman seeking shelter," Julia murmured. "And a deputy who found his heart's true purpose," Gabriel added. Inside, Matthew made a small sound in his sleep, and together they turned to attend to their son, stepping fully into the future they had never expected, but had been destined to find in an abandoned church in Wickenburg, Arizona territory, where broken things had been made whole again through the transformative power of love. 5 years later, St. Matthew's Church stood as the proud centerpiece of Wickenburg. Its bell tower, added the previous year through a town fundraising effort, visible for miles across the desert landscape. The church that had once been abandoned was now the heart of the community, hosting Sunday services, town meetings, and the occasional wedding. On a warm spring morning, Julia Easton stood in the doorway of the family home, which had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family. Beside Matthew, now an energetic 5-year-old with his mother's dark hair and his adoptive father's curious nature, were 3-year-old twins, Sarah and Samuel, and infant Joseph, barely 6 months old and sleeping soundly in his cradle. "Mama, when's Papa coming home?" Matthew asked, looking up from the wooden horse Gabriel had carved for his last birthday. "Soon, sweetheart," Julia assured him, scanning the horizon for signs of riders. Gabriel, now the sheriff of Wickenburg following Sheriff Daniel's retirement 2 years prior, had been gone for 3 days on official business in Phoenix. As if summoned by her thoughts, a cloud of dust appeared on the road, and soon Gabriel's familiar figure came into view. Matthew spotted him at the same moment and let out a whoop of excitement. "Papa's home!" he cried, rushing down the path toward the approaching rider with the twins toddling after him. Julia watched, her heart full as Gabriel dismounted and scooped up all 3 children in a jubilant embrace. 5 years of marriage had added a few streaks of gray to his temples and new laugh lines around his eyes, but had done nothing to diminish the love that shone in his face whenever he looked at his family. "And how's my beautiful wife?" Gabriel called as he approached the house, a child in each arm and Matthew clinging to his leg. "Missing her husband," Julia replied with a smile. "How was Phoenix?" "Hot, dusty, and lacking the most important people in my life," Gabriel said, leaning in to kiss her. "But productive. The territorial governor approved our petition for a school building." Julia's eyes widened. "Gabriel, that's wonderful news," he nodded, pride evident in his expression. "Construction starts next month, and—" He paused dramatically. "I may have mentioned to the governor that Wickenburg has a Boston-educated teacher in residence who might be persuaded to take on the position." "Me," Julia laughed. "I haven't taught in years, and I have 4 children to care for." "3 in the fall," Gabriel pointed out. "Matthew will be in school himself, and Mrs. Holloway has already volunteered to help with the little ones while you're teaching." He set the twins down and they scampered off to play. Thomas's dream of building a school where all children could learn, you could make it a reality here in Wickenburg. Julia felt a rush of emotion at the mention of her first husband. Over the years, she had shared stories of Thomas with Gabriel and with Matthew, keeping his memory alive while building their new life together. Gabriel had always honored that part of her past with remarkable grace. "I think Thomas would approve," she said softly. "And I admit, the idea is tempting." "Just think about it," Gabriel suggested. "No need to decide today." He moved to check on baby Joseph, who was beginning to stir in his cradle. As Gabriel lifted the infant, cradling him with the practiced ease of a devoted father, Julia was struck anew by how blessed she was. "You ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Taking on another man's widow and child, building this life in Wickenburg instead of seeking adventure elsewhere?" Gabriel looked up, genuine confusion crossing his features. "Regret the greatest joy of my life, not for a single moment." He crossed the room to stand before her, baby Joseph nestled between them. "Every morning I wake up next to you, I thank God for bringing you to that abandoned church." "Even with 4 children underfoot and more gray hairs every year," Julia teased, reaching up to touch the silver strands at his temple. "Especially then," Gabriel assured her. "These gray hairs are earned through happiness, Julia, through living fully and loving deeply." That evening, after the children were asleep, Gabriel and Julia walked hand in hand to St. Matthew's Church for the monthly town council meeting. As they approached the building that had changed the course of their lives, they paused to admire it in the glow of the setting sun. "Hard to believe it was once in ruins," Julia remarked, leaning against Gabriel's shoulder. "I knew from the moment I saw you there that both you and this church were worth saving," Gabriel replied. "Best decision I ever made." Inside, the church was filled with the faces of friends and neighbors who had become like family over the years. Mrs. Holloway, now in her 70s but still the heart of the community. Doc Wilson, who had delivered all 4 Easton children. Young Thomas Parker, who had ridden to fetch Julia when Gabriel was shot, now a deputy himself. As the meeting progressed, discussing everything from the new school to the upcoming Harvest Festival, Julia looked around at the community that had embraced her so completely. In her wildest dreams, she could never have imagined that seeking temporary shelter in an abandoned church would lead to such fullness of life. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet of their home, Gabriel traced lazy patterns on Julia's arm. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how life leads us down unexpected paths," Julia replied. "When I left Boston, I thought I was heading to a new start in California. Instead, I found my true home here." She turned to face him. "I'll take the teaching position, Gabriel. It feels right, like honoring the past while embracing our future." Gabriel smiled, pulling her closer. "You'll be magnificent. The children of Wickenburg are lucky to have you." "And I'm lucky to have you," Julia whispered. "My deputy who became so much more." "Sheriff now," Gabriel corrected with a playful wink. "Always my deputy first," Julia insisted. "The man who restored a broken church and mended a broken heart along with it." Outside their window, the spire of St. Matthew's was silhouetted against the star-filled Arizona sky, a testament to renewal, to second chances, and to the enduring power of love that could transform ruins into sanctuaries and strangers into family. In the years that followed, the story of the pregnant widow and the deputy who restored the abandoned church for their wedding became something of a legend in Wickenburg. It was told and retold, growing more romantic with each telling, but at its heart remained the simple truth of 2 people who found each other in the most unexpected of circumstances and built a life of extraordinary meaning from the ruins of their past. And every year on their anniversary, Gabriel and Julia Easton would stand together in St. Matthew's Church, surrounded by their growing family, and renew the vows they had made on that November day, promises kept through joy and sorrow, abundance and hardship, and the everyday miracle of a love that continued to deepen with the passage of time. For Julia, who had once sought only temporary shelter within those walls, and for Gabriel, who had seen possibility where others saw only decay, the church remained a sacred reminder that sometimes the most broken places become the foundation for the strongest bonds, and that love, like faith, has the power to restore what once was lost and make it more beautiful than before.